Good afternoon, and welcome to the online lecture series on mobility analysis and planning for human-scale cities. My name is Age Poom, and I'm an associate professor in urban environment, and we organize this lecture series together at the Mobility Lab of the University of Tartu with Siiri Silm, associate professor in human geography, and Martin Haamer, a junior researcher in transport studies. The recordings of all lectures in this lecture series, including the one from today, are available from the lecture series website, transportplanning.ut.ee. And this is the fourth year of the lecture series and the very final lecture of this series of this spring. We are very excited to welcome here today Miloš Mladenović from Aalto University. Miloš is an associate professor at the Spatial Planning and Transportation Engineering Group, and he is also a vice dean of research at the School of Engineering at Aalto University. His current research interests include the interplay of society and emerging mobility technologies, as well as the development of decision support methods and planning processes. Miloš is an editorial board member of the open access journal European Transport Research Review and the Journal of Urban Mobility. His previous and current teaching responsibilities include a range of courses in transport systems policy, planning, modeling, management, and design. He has been a deputy leader for the master program Spatial Planning and Transportation Engineering, and he is currently the leader of the master's program Sustainable Urban Mobility Transitions. And this leads us to his talk today, entitled Towards a Plangineering Identity, Lessons from the Spatial Planning and Transportation Engineering Master's Program. With this lecture, we would like to highlight the role of a new generation of transport and land use planners and the importance of education in sustainability transitions, as well as the challenges of transforming the education system itself. Should you have any questions for Miloš, so please do write them in the chat, and we will take them in the Q&A session at the very end. And now, Miloš, the screen is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for also the invitation for having me here today. You should be able to see my screen. I'm not going to read through the title again, but basically I will keep using the word SPT because it's just shorter than Spatial Planning and Transportation Engineering. As you can see, it's a cumbersome name that has its own path dependence. So if you hear the word SPT, that's what it basically means. I'll mention it probably quite a lot today. The three parts that I'll talk about today, we'll start with identity, because that's also in the title. Then we'll talk a little bit about SPT program, how is it going now, but also starting with where it started, yeah? And then some lessons on this very, very topic. I thought also that since this is the last sort of lecture in this series, it's a good time to open up some existential questions as well. So I hope you don't mind me bringing those to the table. Anyway, so why do we need to talk about identity, and what is this thing? Well, that's going to be this first part. If you are familiar with the work of Donella Meadows, this work is on deep leverage points for kind of system transformation. This list that you see here in front of you, 1 to 12, lists these different leverage points. The deep ones are towards the bottom, as it says there in the graph. So fundamentally, that's what we're kind of dealing here with. Yeah, if you put our field in a very big picture, this is the fundamental challenge. We can keep on tinkering with the upper part, which is oftentimes just on kind of infrastructure design or certain isolated policies and so on. But at the core are these levels 1 to 3 at the very bottom. So I'll take this level 2 in focus. It kind of connects to level 1 and 3 as well, but it's a question of the mindset or the paradigm, yeah, from where the system arises. And we'll get back to that towards the very end. But how does it connect? I mean, the whole question of mindset or a paradigm. If you go back to kind of learning theories, and here I say deep learning, I don't mean machine learning of any kind. I mean like transformative human learning in this kind of university level setting. It's oftentimes about, of course, knowledge and skills, but fundamentally it's about identity. Yeah, that's what we know from learning theories. And when I say identity, I don't mean like, you know, personal identity in that sense, but more strictly professional identity. Yeah. So who do you think you are as a professional? And when people ask me that question, I have various answers, and that also is partly something we'll have to kind of unpack as well. But when we talk about identity, if you need more kind of specific examples, usually this drills down to like beliefs, assumptions, values, could be other things like taboos, myths, and so on. Basically something that in some other words people would call culture, if you think about kind of like identities of groups of people. So that's why it kind of matters. And then I think it's quite important to unpack my own bias or my own identity, or kind of where it started and where is it going. Path dependence is always there. The picture on the left is from Belgrade, you know, in the 60s. That's, you know, when people ask me where I'm from or where I was born, I say Yugoslavia, and then they laugh because the country doesn't exist anymore. So for those crash course, historical crash course in 30 seconds, Yugoslavia was and still, or that region is still kind of the place in between East and West. There was this Tito-Stalin split in the early, just after the Second World War, so we kind of never ended up behind the Iron Curtain, but we also never ended up in the kind of capitalist West. And then there was this non-alignment movement that Yugoslavia led with many other countries like India, Egypt, and so on. So here is a protest. I think this was after Patrice Lumumba was killed in Congo. So kind of like showing that this has always been, and that's my own epistemology. I have had to read from East and West in a sense and kind of grapple with that liminal space of my own. The second picture on the right down is kind of what I started to study, or where I went to study transportation engineering. Believe it or not, it's a whole building. That whole building is transportation engineering faculty. Again, legacy of Yugoslavia. Luckily, that kind of epistemology wasn't rooted in civil engineering the way it's usually rooted in kind of Western educational systems. Transportation engineering is like a subfield of civil engineering. So you learn about structures and physics and stuff like that, and then you end up sort of like shifting, applying that same mindset to kind of mobility questions. And we all know that's kind of like the root of the problem as well. While this education had a lot more social science and kind of systems thinking and other sorts of things, relatively speaking to the kind of the dominant educational paradigm. Anyway, that's something to kind of recognize right from the beginning. Let's take a look now at this kind of SPT program back then and kind of now, how it started. So it kind of, the program starts it's quite closely aligned to my own start in Finland. I moved here in 2014. So very quickly, we started the program. I wasn't there when the first version was being developed in that sense. So this is kind of the program level outcomes we had in 2015 when we started. If you look at this list, I mean, you can like later on watch the recording and really go through all of these. We're not going to go through all of these now. But if you think about like this in planning terms, like if you had a city plan and you had 20 outcomes or 20 goals, that would be a rather schizophrenic plan. Yeah, that sort of tells you that you haven't figured out your priorities right. Yeah. So in a sense, this list is good as sort of a diverging list. It provides a lot of kind of options in a sense, but it hasn't been completely mapped back to the courses and kind of like it doesn't really sort of tell us what's the most important stuff that we should be having. Yeah, because more is not necessarily always better in that sense. And then the initial list of courses that I sort of saw when I came was basically this. Yeah, so you have this whole kind of 2-year master's program in European terms with a thesis included at the end, which is usually 30 credits. So then there's like a set of core courses that everyone has to take, and there you can really see, if you sort of pay close attention, you can see sort of transport courses, and then planning courses. Yeah, there has been a clear kind of border there. So this is basically level 1 of integration. Yeah, that we have had at the very beginning of the program. There was just the fact that your student would take some common courses from these 2 different, broadly speaking, fields of transport, and then more broadly planning. Yeah. So the first course that I had to teach was transport system planning, which I already had a bit of sort of dissonance with the course, like, how can we do planning when we don't know what are we planning for? So that's where, and then following that dissonant thought led me to then start to think about how we can kind of start developing our master's program, because initially it's a great thing to combine these 2 things, but was it really integrated on a high level? Probably not. Yeah. So in order to do that kind of development over time, I have had some training in what in the US they call engineering education. So like basically methods on kind of, not just how to develop courses, but also how to develop programs. Yeah. So I luckily have kind of transferred that knowledge also into this work. So there has been, and there is a decent amount of research on kind of curriculum development, meaning like program level development. So this is in a sense the framework that we have had. You usually have course level questionnaires in many universities nowadays, kind of some kind of feedback on how the course is going. But an important intervention we have added was a semester level questionnaire. So like after every semester, asking the students not just sort of how the courses went, but also these questions about, what do you think about the integration of these 2 disciplines, more broadly speaking, again, transport and planning. And then after some time, when we had enough of alumni coming out of this program, we could also have alumni questionnaire kind of reflecting back on what they have been learning in the program versus what they're doing in practice, because there is also that sort of gap, or in positive and negative terms. Sort of our students are a little bit ahead of the curve on some of the things, and then on some of the other things they maybe are not. We also had to do some trade-offs and sacrifices on what they should also not be learning in traditional terms. So that's also, of course, important to get that feedback loop going on. On top of that, we have been running different kinds of interviews with different stakeholders, and well, shortly put, most of them said, "I wish I could take this program." I think that was a good kind of feedback to us. But of course, they also had quite interesting things to kind of bring to the table and challenge and question and so on. Of course, it was also important to compare to other programs that exist out there around the world. There are some programs that have some adjacent ways of thinking and so on. So not too many, but some. And all this information would come together in faculty workshops, where, in kind of a communicative planning setting with a lot of sort of discussions and why are we doing this or that, and what is this and that, and mutual understanding and misunderstanding, and all this sort of process we had to kind of muddle through to revamp the whole program. So, but if I think about this more kind of on a conceptual level, if we want to achieve this second integration level, it wasn't possible to just somehow kind of like push these 2 disciplines together. Yeah, the kind of on the left side, if you think about planning, usually comes from architecture or geography, and then sort of the transport stuff is usually rooted in some kind of civil engineering departments, or in some cases industrial engineering department. So some kind of like brute force merger can only get you so far. Yeah. So the one way to kind of develop some core courses or some core concept as well was to try to find these underlying roots of these two trees. And of course, sort of, sustainability, not as a wishy-washy word, but as a sort of a very strong sustainability concept, and kind of even planetary well-being and all that stuff, has been an inspiration for this kind of thinking about this second integration level there. Yeah, so you see these seven competences, and here they are listed a bit more spoken out, let's say, or elaborated. But borderline, there is the systems thinking competence. Anticipation is quite important, of course, because we work with futures. Then there are these sort of 2, 3, and 4 are about living beings. Oftentimes it's humans have to understand human behavior, but we also are dealing with change of that behavior or the lack of it sometimes. The planetary well-being perspective pushes us to think also this kind of about the multi-species question, that this is not just about humans. And then there's these sort of classical planning competences, like the normative one, being able to think in terms of social justice or equity, and then sort of strategy as well. And then finally, this is always, or has always been, a communicative planning problem. It's just unfortunate that we still are educating a lot of civil engineers around the world without this interpersonal competence as well. So with the previous framework and kind of having this root of these underlying competences, we were able to sort of at least cut the program level outcomes in half of the length, at least, and get to something like this. Yeah, that starts with human behavior and spatial temporal dynamics, the kind of the contextual understanding, but including also politics, because planning is very much political as well. Words that I have not heard in previous education, word politics. Yeah, that's another word you hear in engineering, or you hear it, or in terms of like, oh, this is just a hurdle, this is just annoying thing that happens, and it's not like it's the essence of democracy or something like that. And then of course a lot of these other things are about sort of envisioning futures and being able to communicate them and assess them, and also kind of create different planning, not just policies, but also processes. I think the word processes is another big thing that we are quite a lot talking about in our program, as opposed to kind of, again, what I have seen in the past, especially because, of course, in the Nordics, we rarely have this very heavy institutional processes like you would see in the US, where there is like, every single step has a PDF form to be filled up by Federal Highway Administration or something like that. But oftentimes it's pretty much sort of, small groups of planners crafting the process as they're implementing it. And then, of course, all this leads to kind of, being able to communicate with residents and all other kinds of people. And finally, of course, not the least important, probably in my personal opinion, the most important is this sort of moral implications that has to always be there. So that then leads us to our revised course list. So luckily now in our core courses, we don't have a transport course or just, a spatial planning course. So we have these foundations of plangineering, which is, you can guess who is the responsible teacher of that course. That talks a lot about kind of, what are humans and human behavior, and then this sort of systems thinking stuff, and of course, sort of planetary boundaries and all that other stuff. The planning systems is a course that talks about the actual systems of planning in kind of terms of administration, law, but also planning cultures. It has, of course, dominantly a Nordic perspective, and we are, of course, thinking should it also include some more comparative things with the rest of Europe, maybe even US. Planning theory is a course that is kind of, if you are into that field, there is a journal planning theory, and it's not necessarily just sort of spatial planning or land use planning. It's more comprehensively kind of a set of concepts, like the concept of communicative planning, that is quite central for that field. Then again, we don't have, if you do remember the list, or if you check the list back, there was one course called something like Transport Policy and Economics. Eventually, now we have this land use and transport policy, which is how it should be. It should be studied together, yeah, and then even using kind of more advanced or more kind of comprehensive policy frameworks to think about what is land use and transport policy. And quite central to the core courses is the planning studio, which is a 10 credit, a bit longer course where the students are working in a group, sort of simulating how a planning process would work on a small scale, usually with not usually, always with a case from a specific city in Finland, as you might expect. We have a thesis seminar, which is a supporting thing for the thesis itself, where students have to kind of learn a lot about methodology and other kinds of things like that. So then the advanced courses haven't really changed quite a lot. Now we have this, at the bottom, we have this planning for planetary well-being studio, which brings even further this sort of multi-species or more than human perspective. So it's another studio course that is a bit on a kind of more detailed level, as opposed to the planning studio that is more on strategic level. But then in the advanced courses, we have tried to somehow sort of make a bit more clear concepts that they're using in there. So how should they connect to the core courses, as opposed to leaving that weaving to the students themselves, as we did that in the first version. So back, if you sort of want to do this in practice in your own exercise, one thing is to kind of connect the outcomes to the courses, but it's also, we also had to kind of think about the outcomes and the seven areas of competence as well. So that's the bottom line of program level development or assessment, this kind of a matrix where you compare outcomes and courses, or then outcomes and competences, more broadly speaking. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these things, but I think if you see the material later, you can kind of use it for your own inspiration. So this whole kind of thing deserves also a diversity of learning methods. So the word exam is not a very oftentimes used word in our program. We do have some exams, but a lot of this is various ways of sort of more active learning, either individually or in then some kind of a group setting. So this would be sort of at least what I've managed to gather from all our different courses. On top of that, so diversity is great, but it's also a problem. We can of course also discuss that down the road. And we have, if that was not diverse enough, then this is also the other thing. We have been trying to be rather liberal when we are admitting students. Yeah. So these are all the different educational backgrounds of our students, or the same goes also for our faculty. I mean, we're also quite diverse group that includes, architects and psychologists and environmental studies and sort of industrial engineering and so on. So definitely a lot of diversity in the faculty and in the student background. And I think despite all the challenges of that, it has always been a bigger benefit than a burden. So kind of if you are into utilitarian ethics, cost benefit is good in that sense. So with that in mind, we of course always have to think about, so what, yeah? What did we learn from this whole thing? But also, what does this mean maybe for our whole field, and or kind of maybe I would like to raise some questions for kind of looking onwards. But first about these lessons, yeah. So I think we have proven that this is possible. Yeah? This kind of higher level of integration, not just sort of putting courses together, which in some ways some universities enable, through electives or through other kinds of things. You can kind of like take courses from here and there as an individual student, at least in Europe. Of course, in some other educational systems, that's also possible. But again, still the burden is somehow on the student themselves to figure out this kind of patchwork of courses. So in this sense, this is definitely possible to kind of, especially if you take this something bigger than the field itself, yeah, like we chose to maybe ground our reflection in these questions of sustainability and beyond. So that goes back to this second big lesson. in general, in this field, having a vision is usually one of the crucial aspects of any kind of plan. Hopefully that vision is path breaking, meaning like we're not just continuing the path dependence of the past, because we have to recognize that these disciplines are path dependent themselves. Yeah. So like why do we have transportation engineers, or why do we have urban planners as disciplines? Yeah. Like it wasn't like we had some kind of deliberation process that lasted 5 or 10 years where we have all discussed about all the possible options of how should this field develop and so on, and did some strategy, and then we decided this was the best. No, it was just sort of gradual evolution of existing fields and kind of ongoing power struggles that still continue until today. And that's the same sort of positions that these fields have taken, and sort of still defending their own turf and so on. So kind of the vision is not necessarily there in this kind of comprehensive, holistic way to begin with. So bottom line is, it's very important to think beyond the kind of the path dependencies, which is of course it means you have to be able to talk about path dependencies in that sense. And then this kind of a lesson for that will come maybe more from engineering education literature or field of its own. It's quite important to think about this as a process. Yeah. And as you can see, it took us, several years to kind of, first of all, to start and to understand each other to some extent, and then to some extent to find some kind of epistemological connections between different fields or ways of thinking and so on. But it was quite important that we had this continuous assessment, sort of that we were getting the messages from the students, from the alumni, and so on, that it wasn't just sort of us faculty sitting in our echo chamber and still sort of spinning around the same question, what is planning or what is transport and so on. So those will be kind of the three main takeaways I would put forth. Yeah, we're not gonna stop here, obviously. We'll continue the continuous assessment and see what we can keep on doing. We definitely have to work even further on kind of clarifying the learning pathways, especially taking into account the diversity of educational backgrounds. So to some extent, to maybe add some kind of prerequisite course even before kind of entering the master's program, or then during the master's program, to sort of also question what are these core courses at the end of the day. Yeah, what should be the core list of concepts. So that's still something that we have to kind of work on. We're trying to also do a lot more structured process on kind of how our students should find the thesis and kind of arrange that whole process, but especially this sort of placement of finding the thesis, because we see this, the thesis itself is really a culmination in individual learning in those 2 years for students. So it's also very important to kind of choose wisely the topic, the method, but also sort of in which organization to work on the thesis, because usually 90+% of our theses are done outside of the university in some organization, sort of public or private sector. It really kind of varies. So there is also sort of a lot of other kinds of learning and identity change as well, yeah, happening in that process. My favorite discussion in those faculty workshops was, what is a method, yeah, in planning or in engineering. I wish you would have attended those sessions. You would think that the word method means something very clear, but then it's not. So maybe because a lot of academics think about sort of methods as the methodology section in their papers, and not as like, what is the thing that you're doing in planning practice. So that's something that we'll have to kind of still reassess and think strongly on the method side, because we're still we're still sort of like maybe 60% more on kind of theory side than the sort of the method side. But that's a deliberate choice because we have these universities of applied sciences in Finland that are maybe like 90% method and 10% theory in that sense. Electives from other programs, so that's has always been a kind of a question. Modern university is a I don't know if people in the audience have been taking courses in recent years, but modern university, at least Aalto, is sort of a liquid organization that, you know, courses exist and then they don't after some time. So you have to kind of keep on running this, which is sort of, I guess it's a positive effect of Bologna and some other things, as opposed to maybe, I mean, in my education, I had one elective, and that's because I kind of like really asked for it and complained and so on. So everything else was like, this is the path. This is what you're going to learn. You knew from day one that these are the sort of 4 or 5 years of your life, or more than that. So kind of, yeah, now we're also in that sort of the challenges of the more fluid university setting. And then this third level of integration, yeah, the next development milestone is on the way. So what is this? That question then brought me to think, what is this third level of integration? How we would integrate this program even further, or then I did this sort of framestorming, not brainstorming, but framestorming exercise, and sort of, is this a wrong question? Yeah. Should this be a reimagination of what this field is? So if you have free time and you want to play with your own identity, you can ask yourself this question. So how would you invent this field from scratch? Like if you had a blank slate, you knew that these different knowledges exist. It's a little bit like John Rawls' veil of ignorance test, sort of thought experiment. You know that this kind of knowledge exists that we have as humans in 2025. But this field doesn't exist. How would you, what patchwork of knowledges or disciplines would you put together? Yeah, I already gave you my answer, the patchwork. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not going to give you a complete answer to this question. I'll give you some further food for thought. Yeah. So the question of imagination is always a question of epistemic justice. Yeah, that's something that we have to kind of think about, and here is more of a comic on the word progress, because it's going to unpack some of the other stuff. Yeah. So behind all of this is really the question of valid knowledge. Yeah. What is valid knowledge, or what is accepted as valid knowledge in a certain sense? So then, me thinking about this further, this kind of planning and transport paradigm, even if it started from different disciplines, it's still some kind of common root in this kind of post-enlightenment thinking. But I think it still is something that is a paradigm that kind of propagates these existing patterns of power, and at the end of the day, it looks like it's protecting the status quo. That is the one that is kind of pushing us towards this kind of cascading collapse due to climate crisis and all the other kind of tipping points there. Yeah. So it's, at the end of the day, it is, these fields have accumulated privileges. So that's why sort of course, the status quo matters on the one side. And on the other side, I think it's still kind of narrowing. Ultimately, this is about narrowing this kind of way of being, yeah, of what is an acceptable way of being. So a lot of my colleagues would, there has been this discussion about the Anthropocene and so on, and a lot of my colleagues will say, well, this is just a problem of capitalism, yeah, or the Capitalocene. And I'm not fond of sort of single, you have this sort of hedgehog versus the fox thinking, and the hedgehog knows one big thing and the fox knows many little things. I'm not fond of the hedgehog mindset myself personally. I'm not saying it shouldn't exist. It's totally valid way of thinking, but I'm not here to say this. It's just the capitalism. Yeah, that is sort of the root cause of this problem. The challenges that I see in the dominant paradigm are multiple. Yeah? So at the end of the day, we're still kind of working in this, and you read the list number one. Yeah, it's growth obsessed, individualistic, patriarchal, colonial, imperialistic, in a sense, expansionist, extractivist, exploitative, narrowly negatively discriminatory, and then narrowly anthropocentric paradigm. Yeah, it started from certain places in the Western civilization at certain point in time that coincided with this whole kind of colonial imperialist project, and it still propagates this sort of neoclassical, both in engineering or in economics or in architecture or other sorts of fields, this sort of top-down view of the world. Yeah, and oftentimes we still fall into this trap of some kind of always looking for this kind of comprehensive rationality in a classical sense, that we will know all the possible futures and we will be able to assess all the possible impacts. And the answer is always just sort of more calculation, more analysis, and so on. We, of course, also very much don't discuss different kinds of epistemologies, or basically the question of meaning. So what kind of meanings are already there? If you look into anthropological studies or kind of cultural studies, you know that humans have always had different meanings of life, or what's the good thing, or what is justice, and so on, beyond the kind of the narrow ones that we are propagating with this idea of progress oftentimes, or growth, or however you want to call it. At the same time, as I said, sort of this kind of critical analysis of society or policy, or the word politics at some point that I mentioned, it's very much still not there. Yeah, it's kind of like, why are you talking about this at all? And in many ways, we are still somehow trying to kind of I mean, if you look at research that then feeds into education, most of this is from certain places in the world. Yeah, the amount of papers we have about cycling in the Netherlands or in Denmark is, it's not the same as the amount of papers we have about cycling in Belgrade. Yeah, even. And then finally, it's also the question of societal transformation. What kinds of solutions do we envision ourselves, and do we always come back to, oh well, it is about better infrastructure? Yeah, I mean, yes, it is about better infrastructure, but it's that's not the one and only way of societal transformation. And just sort of to throw this into the game, I'm not advocating degrowth. That's, again, it's just a word that could mean different things for different people. It also is a response to the growth paradigm. But for me, it's more interesting, this sort of list of policy proposals. So to me, this is where our field starts to be like, oh, is this just really about, how people move, or, what is traffic? When we know a lot of these things are connected to sort of, how do we live our whole lives all together? Yeah. So fundamentally, this is really about sort of the everyday life of humans, of course, many other living beings. And we have somehow managed to kind of dissect it and silo it and break it down and pretend that this is sort of, this is just about this sort of ministry or that sort of ministry. Not necessarily really about sort of the everyday practices, that lived experience and everything else that kind of life as it is has. And for kind of, starting the conversation, I'm wondering, how would our field, not just sort of epistemologically in terms of what kind of knowledges should there be, but these sort of underlying values or meanings, and how would our field look like if we were kind of, instead of this sort of speed, growth, progress, development, advancement, all this ultimately colonial terms. Yeah, well, how would our field look like if we started with these words like, regeneration or harmony, or, not mobility, but stillness? Yeah, solidarity, compassion, all these other kinds of words that are maybe there, but are oftentimes on the fringes of the paradigm. So if that was not existential enough, here is a call from someone from the global south that at the end of the day, this is about a new level of consciousness, different kinds of meanings, and of course morality that we have to jump on right now as kind of humanity at large. Humanity is not going to do it as a sort of, it's not an individual. So I always turn the gaze back to myself and I try to think, what is it that I can do in this sense? And I think that's something that I have some answers to that, but I also don't. And I think the answer is still in the process and of modeling through this. But maybe with the right kinds of questions, the process will unfold in the right direction. Or maybe I'm just hopeful engineer that sort of thinks about knowledge as such. I don't know. We'll see now in the discussion. I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward now to hearing what you have to say or ask about this stuff.
Oh yes, yeah. Applause to Miloš first. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this thoughtful presentation. Really going, as you said in the beginning, like going back to the roots, questioning our own identity, questioning the meaning, what we actually do in our day-to-day lives, both as students or as faculty at the university, but also as stakeholders and professionals out in the society. So bringing on these kind of deep questions are necessary, and at the same time, your first part of the talk was such a clear reflection on how you have achieved to make the change in your own education system and bring in those questions into the curricula. So applause also for that, for this achievement, and I really hope that actually makes the change or in the society. But I also see that the Finnish society is kind of ready for this kind of transformation in the mindset, and also the transformation in the education system. So perhaps one of the questions is here that to change or to transform the education system itself, it also means that we as people who are the teachers then, we have to look into ourselves. So what about how has this process affected your staff, the research you do? You do also research-oriented teaching, I'm sure, at Tartu University, and whether you have, or which kind of challenges you have had there, and what's the outcome in this faculty position? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the crux of it. If we are not going to achieve the change among the faculty, then how are we going to talk about any kind of other transformation as well? Yeah. On the other side, changing the identity is the most difficult thing for a human being. Yeah. So you can always sort of learn new facts or learn a skill in a software and so on, but the identity change is definitely the most difficult one. So, well, why? Well, basically because there could be many different answers for that, but the bottom line is that you as a human, you're looking for some kind of stasis, some kind of stability, yeah? And changing the identity is very kind of semi-schizophrenic act. You have to sort of split the personality and maybe kill part of it to evolve. Yeah. Like for example, I don't identify as a transportation engineer anymore. I mean, I do have that background, and I'm playing with this word plangineer just to sort of be able to play with that identity. myself. So bottom line is the discussion has to start with, it has to be about that as well. Yeah, that was the key kind of what we did in the process, that we didn't just talk about knowledge and skills, but we also openly discussed our identities and sort of, like laughed a little bit. Yeah, I'm an engineer and this is how, like obviously this was, or then I'm an architect, someone says, and then, like obviously. So maybe sort of trying to openly discuss these identities, but also in some kind of a humble or sort of, a little bit of humorous way, if you wish, of sort of self-reflecting on all our kind of pet dependencies and ways of thinking and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think that has been very, very important to bring the identity to the table when you discuss. And then the second thing, maybe a big lesson, is that like just don't expect understanding from day one, for sure. Don't expect it even in the first year. Like just like say like, okay, it's going to take us 3 or 4 years to start to understand each other's language to some extent. Of course, it was also useful that we did some of the exercises that kind of like we read each other's stuff and so on. And I'm also curious by nature, so I did a lot more sort of reading of everyone else's stuff. And at some point, I was able to sort of like translate, like this is an engineer speaks like this, and then but that words means something else to a sociologist. And then so you kind of also need these intermediary people at some point in time, yeah. And that has affected definitely what you also mentioned. The third part is kind of the research that we do, yeah. So I think we're nowadays finding a lot more connections between our research than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's actually very, very encouraging. By the way, do your alumni also feel like a bit themselves in a schizophrenic situation when they reach the work market? So whether the society or the work market is ready to take them on board with their new identities or with their new translation capacities? I'm sure they are, but just, some reflection about that change that you have been initiating at the university. It also ultimately has an effect also on the industry.
Yeah, well, luckily we live in Finland. So in terms of like, it's still kind of a rather understanding and kind of acceptable society of diversity of different kinds. That's definitely a big kind of cultural factor, as it is. The second factor is that it's simply there isn't enough experts of this kind historically in Finland, because there hasn't really been a proper planning education in the past, and that's kind of the transport engineering education has also been sort of skewed towards certain direction. So kind of with the cultural understanding and the lack of people in the field, we can then compensate for some kind of initial, okay, that's how you think, yeah, stuff and so on. But of course, our students are exposed to practitioners throughout. We have a lot of guest lecturers that come from practice, and then the thesis placement is a very big kind of a learning curve, because they're doing it in a non-academic organization. So they also have time, and we tell them these things. Like we're telling them, like, you're learning stuff that your manager has never heard in their life. Like they don't know what human behavior is. Like they have learned the concept of demand and supply, but like, tell them what a human being is, like they have no clue. Yeah. Or then we tell them like, communicative planning or this or that, or the, social justice, this or that. So they're very much aware of kind of what is the potential sort of challenge that might arise. So we're kind of trying to actively prepare them. On the other side, the biggest complaint, but at the same time I'm most proud of it, is that there was just last survey. I don't remember the exact word, but it was something like, this master's program is not teaching me to become a traffic engineer. And I was like, yes, exactly. We're not teaching you to become a traffic engineer. So so that was sort of a complaint, and I was like, yeah, that exactly. That's what we're trying to do.
The message has been conveyed. Yes, anyone here in the audience, please, do you have questions? Siiri.
Thank you. And thank you, Miloš, for this presentation. I think it was like a really good overview of different topics that you had in this curriculum, that there is different aspects. My main question was also related to the how the other people in this in like different levels receive this courses or this curriculum. First, I think you answered this on this department level, but also, as I understood right, that this idea came from you. Was I right? That you was the idea
of the
or
program
how?
development, yeah. But the program was initially, it was also a top-down decision back even before I came, yeah. So it was kind of like someone in the kind of upper level management of the university just said, because these two groups, the transport research group and formerly the urban studies group at Aalto, they were in two different departments, and someone just told them sort of like, come together and make a joint master's program. And for a while back then, they were even in two different departments. So this whole master's program was kind of like a merging point of also the organizational change, that now we are in the same SPT group, and we had to kind of invent the group as we have been inventing the program.
Okay, I just thought what was the story of this, or how it get together, because and how you find these people who is willing to do this change. I mean that they stayed all the same who was in these two departments, or they had also some changes there, that some was not able to or not would like to do this differently, the courses.
Yeah, so it probably helps the fact that I and some other people, we have never studied at Aalto University. So we didn't have this legacy of like, we have to protect the history, but this is, so we sort of like came from outside and we didn't have that bag or burden to carry. Yeah, this is all, but this is still there in the name, this sort of fundamental challenge that this is called spatial planning and transportation engineering, because both of these words are very important for some people. I mean, I would easily accept many other different names in the program, but for some people these names were really really important. Of course, in some ways they also go back to kind of like translation in Finnish, because then if we had some issues with some of our other master's programs that we try to to call them maybe something like built environment or sustainable communities, that kind of stuff that doesn't always transfer very well to kind of like how the practitioners understand what is it that you're learning at the end of the day. Yeah. So I think we ended up with this compromise. Let's keep kind of like a boring name, but then have interesting content inside. It was like a compromise.
Then it's I see that there is like, if you also hired like new people, it is like how to change the identity. It is you have to not lost or don't remember so much your past, because then you can do the change to get the new future. Then it's like you can't stay all like a similar way or the same identity what you had. Then I see that it was like this maybe one like success what you had that you had also the new people coming to do the new environment there. But then was also the question about that how these students who comes to study this program, you thought or brought out that you did many questionnaires in different levels, but what was the main points they are like agreed, or why they came here, that this is new, or what was the main things from this student side?
Yeah. So I will give you a direct quote from one of the students. So people who study bachelor's, I mean, Aalto, of course, is quite well known in Finnish terms. The bachelor students are kind of continuing very much from the bachelor's program to the master's program. So that's like one inflow channel, our own bachelor students. And the other inflow channel is like we have open call admission from anywhere around the world. So the answer from our bachelor students was, there was this one joke: if you want to earn money, you go to this program X. I'm not gonna say which one is it because it doesn't matter for the point. But then if you want to save the world, you go to SPT. Yeah. Like that's so students are themselves motivated. They are living in this world of cascading collapse and so on, and they know they have to do something about all these crises that we are having. So they see this field, that's where the intrinsic motivation comes from. It's not really about like they don't have already built identity in many cases. Of course, some of them end up working already in their bachelor's or kind of usually for consulting companies and so on. So they kind of, are entering the master's program also with some professional expectations that we are then trying to challenge back to some extent. But it has been kind of now 10 years, so I think the industry is also adapting to some of that stuff. And then this other stream, the kind of students are coming from other universities. So we're getting a lot of geographers, which I'm hoping are also people who want to change the world for the better. So I think it's kind of like it really, and then we are also deliberately not, because we have motivation letters and other kinds of things. We also get a lot of applicants from like traditional civil engineering, and someone comes there and says like, I want to build roads. That's a clear way how you don't get admitted to an SPT program. So it's also about like choosing whom not to admit, and we're kind of very careful in trying to find a balance also in disciplinary terms, to kind of give advantage to social science disciplines, more broadly public administration, those kinds of fields, and also gender balance. We have, I think, probably the best gender balance in the whole school in our program. So at the end of the day, the answer is still in the diversity. That is a deliberate choice.
Thank you. If there is, I have one more question or comment that as I saw that you didn't have on the course like this today's fancy mobility terms like sustainable mobility, or you had, I saw only this smart city, this term, because here in this in our curriculums have also the discussions that do we have like this curriculum name like this fancy names like the new which is attracts to students, or it should be have more like traditional like the courses names. Was this like a strategy for you that the names are more like this general and not in any direction like this this like the course name for this I don't remember exactly, but like the theories, but not name like any of this to the direction for this sustainable mobility or more some other like e-bikes or this smart city or 15-minute city or like this. How you comment this?
Yeah. So we definitely don't have those words like sustainable or smart in this version. We had this, the smart and livable city was there in the name of the studio in the previous version. Well, to me, it's very, very straightforward. What is like? Do you want to if some courses are about something sustainable, does it then mean that the other courses are not? This is the classical kind of challenge of how do you integrate sustainability, for example, into the courses. It shouldn't be just a separate course that somehow, there should be, you should not have a course sustainable urban mobility or whatever as a separate course. It has to be integrated throughout the courses. And part of that whole, so that's why we had those key competences, but we also had to have a lot of discussion about what is sustainability as we understand it right now, that it's not this wishy-washy word, or that it's not these three pillars, the economic, environmental, and social, the way it was defined decades ago, but that it is this sort of strong nested model, and maybe even the planetary boundary stuff, and that thinking starts in the first course and it has to propagate through other courses. It's the same thing like with ethics, yeah. Like you wouldn't put a course like, you know, ethical planning. It has to be sort of, you know, sustainability or all these other things. They have to be sort of throughout the courses.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Miloš. I take a couple of questions from chat in between. So Martin Hamer thanks you for the presentation, and he notes the following. I saw that there are 2 courses, traffic management and traffic flow theory, in the curriculum. So which gave the impression that they might focus on car traffic and related aspects, for example, traffic light cycle optimization. So is this the case, or do these courses focus on sustainable modes of travel as well?
Yeah, excellent observation. So we are working on it for sure, yeah. Because if you look at the books of traffic flow theory, they exactly have, you know, it's motorized vehicle traffic flow theory. So then that would mean, but the versions that we have now, they have, you know, what is traffic flow of pedestrians, of bicycles, of public transport, and so on. Yeah, it turns out the ideas are very simple and similar. Yeah, at the end of the day, this is some kind of, you know, capacity, speed, density, these kinds of things that you measure one way or another. Yeah, in traffic flow theory, same goes with traffic management. So it's supposed to be sort of multimodal. It's just the name is not multimodal traffic management or sustainable traffic management. It's just traffic management. So we have been trying to, do that kind of within the course integration as much as we can.
So again, this is the epistemology of this word. So traffic does not necessarily need to mean only motorized traffic, but it's also all modes of travel that can be included. But the word can be the same, just the sphere of the meaning of this word gets broader and then more to the contemporary ideas of how we want our societies to see. Then there is a comment from Carlos, so I also read it out. Perhaps to the question of how to start to reimagine this field, I would go back to dwelling and roaming as fundamentals to human experience, and would not blame ourselves for the wrongdoings of both disciplines. Is it so that the original ideal behind the program was rational optimization of land use and transport? For example, a narrow definition of sustainability as increasing efficiency.
The original idea, I don't think the original idea was rooted in that, because that would mean that was really, really strongly rooted in the kind of old paradigm. So yeah, it came as a directive, top down for sure. That has been quite an important trigger for the merger. But I think people were still somehow, you know, on that page of, you know, how do we have sustainability to be quite central in it, and not this kind of, you know, narrow classical comprehensive rationality to be the center stage. Yeah, because I mean, in many ways, these ideas are also there in both fields. Yeah, like if you read planning theory, you will see that, you know, there is always this critique of technical rationality and so on. And then if you read stuff in more narrowly transport planning, there is all this, you know, deep uncertainty and kind of, you know, multi-criteria analysis as a way of communicative planning and so on. So these kind of pockets of ideas have been there in this context.
Anyone here? I also had the question about, I don't know the setting at Aalto. So you do educate bachelor and master program students, PhD candidates, but what about your relation to provide input to continuous learning or adult education? This kind of like providing training courses for practitioners. So do you somehow directly affect also this level of education in Finland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good question. So short answer is yes. The long answer is in what way? So So there are these kind of professional education courses that are run through Aalto University. So we have usually quite strong collaboration with people running those courses in kind of what should be the content. And then we usually, the whole kind of SPT group gives guest lectures to those courses. So they're usually this kind of on-site courses that, of course, also sometimes include site visits to other countries abroad as a form of learning. That's number one. Number two is we have been contributing to different kinds of these MOOCs, like the massive open online courses. Some of them are being run through this EAT Urban Mobility platform. If you're not familiar with that, you can check it out. There is a lot of nice short MOOCs, short online courses, or even a couple of hours on the EAT Urban Mobility platform. But then there are other ways of learning, as well. And one of those is simply talking to practitioners, trying to get out of the white ivory tower, or trying to invite people into the ivory tower to show them that it's not so ivory tower anymore. That's one way. And then one thing that I would warmly recommend for you to try, or when I say you, anyone who is listening to these words at any point in time, is like a reading club. Yeah. So we have been running a reading club with practitioners, with a group. We started it as a book club, but then we realized that the book is too long project for practitioners to kind of find time to read. But papers, like actual scientific papers. So we then read one paper every time when we meet, and we meet every, well, like in average 5 to 6 times a year, including the Christmas party. So every time a different person brings a different paper to the table, they're in charge of reading the whole thing for sure, because they chose the paper and kind of leading the discussion. And then everything else is like any kind of book club. Who has time, who shows up, we talk about the paper, and then we end up talking about other things. And after some time, knowledge starts to accumulate. So then that's very interesting. And then that knowledge propagates, especially if those people are kind of higher up in the managerial positions, then the knowledge propagates throughout the different organizations.
Yeah, this is actually an excellent example that you have this format working as well. That the practitioners come to this reading club. They are all very busy, so that they really get something out. How long have you been practicing this format?
Several years now. So.
Yeah, this looks really a great initiative. It's just we here, like to provide you some context, currently we here have 4 practitioners with us in this course. So in a way we have merged regular courses also with these courses that we provide for practitioners who are interested in that, also to encourage discussion between students and practitioners in this way. And they also then are working with their joint problems or case studies, and in this, via this informal discussion or talking, they also learn mutually a bit more, and we have found that this is very enriching for our regular students, and also hope that of course it's enriching for our practitioner, like adult students or learners as well. So perhaps we are coming to the end, but could you a bit more elaborate on the different formats, how practitioners either from the industry or public administration or perhaps the third sector or NGOs are involved in your curriculum, apart from the guest lectures that you mentioned? Then you also mentioned that the students always work on case studies from different Finnish cities, so I assume that the municipalities are involved from there. Are there any other formats like internship built into the curriculum, or perhaps you have some more thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, very good that you have practitioners there in the room, and you have this mutual learning. It's also that academia is learning, not just the practitioners themselves. both sides. But I guess that's also a question of identity, yeah. So to some extent, yeah. So the quite important ingredient that we have is we have a student association called Linky. So so we have also quite close collaboration with them in many different ways. So we're trying to then kind of coordinate these activities because they're the ones also interested in bridging this kind of practice academia gap as well. Yeah. So we're nowadays trying to kind of try to coordinate all the different activities that they're doing with our activities as well. Yeah, this sort of, well, the classical many hands problem that we also have in planning. Yeah, so besides guest lectures, the students can also go to those companies and do these kinds of site visits as well, not just for lectures, but sometimes they visit like a metro depot and other kinds of places like that. Then they also organize some field trips where they can then also sort of exchange with practitioners in various different ways. We used to have a summer school. We have kind of exported that now to the European Union level with EIT Urban Mobility. So those summer schools are now kind of running around Europe, and our students, of course, and other people can attend those. Yeah, so you were also correct that our studio courses are usually, I mean, they're always including a planning case in a specific city. So that always means involvement of X amount of practitioners on that particular planning case. In many cases, they also end up presenting the final results to kind of a broader, even sometimes the city council members and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then the internship, in a sense, is the thesis. Yeah, so they have to kind of in the EAT program, it's even a mandatory thing. They can't even do their thesis in a university only setting. So they really have to spend 3 to 6 months in a non-academic organization with an advisor from that organization. So that's definitely a quite important part of the learning. And then, so one thing that has also been quite important is we have this position, Professor of Practice at Aalto. That usually means 20% contract to someone who works in the industry, and then they have 20% contract in Aalto to do something. In our case, the practicing planner is teaching one of these studio courses, the second one. Yeah. So that really then kind of bridges the gap. The concrete person bridges that has to be this kind of pragmatic, yeah, practitioner that is academic as well. So hopefully that's already kind of a good set of things. But as I said, we'll keep on working on strengthening those relations, because at the end of the day, we're a small country and small number of people. So we kind of have the strength of the network has to be in the connections, not in the numbers.
Yes, that's true. And I'm also happy to say that this is not only about one country or your influence in this country, but also via those same collaboration networks, also European projects, for example. This experience also gets dispersed, and as well as you have international students who then go to other countries to work as well. So this might also have a longitudinal effect, and with a geographic scope bigger than only one country. Miloš, thank you so much for this engaging talk and discussion today. This is the work with thinking critically about our work, the content, the identity and meaning, but also the impact of our work continues, is never ending. It's good that we sometimes take time for that as well, and to together then strive for the better future of our societies. So thank you again.
Yep. Thank you for the invitation.
And with this note, we also close our today's session, and we close also the lecture series for this spring. We will certainly come back next spring You will find Miloš recording from our website from next week. Everyone who has registered for today's talk will also get a notification about that. And we will also ask for a very short feedback from all our listeners and participants to also make this lecture series better for the next time and learn from you as well. Thank you again, and we'll meet next spring.